People's Rights has adopted a number of soft law instruments which addresses the issue of safety of journalists. The Declaration of Principles on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information in Africa, 2019, provides in Principle 20 that, and I quote, states shall guarantee the safety of journalists and other media practitioners. And it further goes on to state that states shall take measures to prevent attacks on journalists and other media practitioners, including murder, extrajudicial killing, torture, and other forms of ill treatment, arbitrary arrest and detention, enforced disappearance, kidnapping, intimidation, threats, and unlawful surveillance undertaken by state and non-state actors. Furthermore, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights adopted Resolution 468 of 2020 on the safety of journalists and media practitioners in Africa. This was adopted during the Commission's 67th Ordinary Session and calls on state parties to, and I quote, ensure the safety of journalists and other media professionals and create a conducive environment for them to practice their profession, including by repealing and reviewing laws which restrict freedom of expression and access to information. Therefore, the ACHPR and my mechanism is very keen to stop impunity against journalists. And this is why today we are having this webinar, even though the Commission is in session. And we thought it fit to have this webinar this morning so as to address this issue and to invite certain panelists to give their views and their observations on the matter. I'd just like to say that, unfortunately, as the Commission is in session, we thought that we would be having interpreters in French and Portuguese, but given that they are taken up with the work of the Commission, unfortunately, this cannot be so. So therefore, I invite the other panelists to give their views and their experiences on the matter. Thank you. Eva, I'll pass on to you so that you can introduce the panelists, or they can introduce themselves.
Thank you, Commissioner. According to the agenda that we have, we'll have the first intervention from Mr. Sadibou Marong, who works with Reporters Sans Frontières, to give us a presentation on attacks against journalists in the Sahel. Mr. Sadibou, you have the floor. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. And thank you, Eva, and thank you also to Commissioner Topsy. I'm very delighted to be part of this webinar this morning as we commemorate the ID 2024. I would like to thank you for that, for this opportunity. And to kick off, I just would like to suggest that to go into the wider landscape in the Sahel. In doing so, we will be able to to understand more the situation in terms of attacks against journalists. And when we at IRSF, we talk about the Sahel. I mean, it's the Central Sahel, Mali, Burkina, and Niger. But also it's a bit of Chad. And from time to time, it is also some neighboring countries, like Benin, which is even a coastal country. And from now, we are also considering Togo and Côte d'Ivoire. I will explain why, because we are actually documenting some journalists from Mali, from Niger, or from Burkina fleeing to Côte d'Ivoire or to Togo or to Benin. So, I mean, in our wider works, now we are considering all those countries. So I would like to say that we have actually nearly 8 journalists who fled their country in the Sahel. There are 6 from Burkina Faso. I have met them last week. 1 from Niger and 1 from Mali, actually, from our recording and our monitoring. We also have 3 journalists enrolled in the army in Burkina Faso. We are still pushing to know the fate of one of those journalists because there is no official narrative about his fate. And we are also pushing to have the truth about his whereabouts. We also have 2 journalists killed in Mali and Chad, and 4 who were kidnapped by the armed group. And these date back since 2021. And we have documented also nearly a dozen of attacks against journalists between last year and the course of this year in those 3 countries. And we have 3 arrests, and we have nearly a dozen of suspension of media, but depending on the kind of media, and this is kind of international media, but also some local media or some African media. In terms of figure, that these are what I wanted to highlight. But I would like also to come to the major trends we identified as RSF in recent years in the Sahel. We have issued a report as part of our campaign, Save the Journalism in the Sahel. And that report warned that the region, the Sahel region, the Central Sahel, was on the way to becoming the continent's leading information-free zone. And that fear was confirmed last year and this year, and is still going. Why we have said that? This is because the Sahel is a region where, for example, when we refer to the treatment of patriotic information, which is a new narrative, for example, which was born in Mali, kind of quote unquote invented by the junta in Mali, that has taken kind of precedence over quality and independent information. And in the course of the years, we have seen how this also has been imposed in 3 of those 4 countries, Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso, all run by juntas. And in terms of consequences, the finding reliable and neutral information on, for example, the activities of the Malian government has become extremely complex, and has dealing with the country's situation also, particularly in the north. And I will stop there to explain the trend we have seen in the north. When they fight back the armed group terrorists, regular army and its allies, either the Wagner militias or the Wagner mercenaries, or their allies, as they used to say in terms of narrative, they used to do a lot of human rights violation at large. And as the North is not accessible for many journalists, those journalists at the beginning who were able to access and reliably document that and come back with the truth, most of them, they have been harassed and attacked. And that's from where the suspension of some international media like RFI, and later like France 24, like BBC Now, like many other media, international media. So, and the trend is that, and this is also for us attacks, these attacks against journalists, but also attacks against the right to information. And then this complexity, we also have seen how the propaganda has been orchestrated by the governments, using, for example, video companies, and this is still going on in Mali, where they used to say video man, and video man referred to some kind of journalists who are close to either some authorities using their videos, and sometimes also denouncing other journalists, including local journalists, if those have been able to narrate the situation independently. This is a trend we have seen. And also from our observations, this patriotic treatment of the news or of information took place in two stages, probably at different speeds, but in the Central Sahel. First, we have the international media who were kept out of the field. Sometimes in the days following a change of power, for example, RFI, as I said, and France 24 was suspended just 1 week after the coup. And from our perspective also, these are also attacks against the right to information, sometimes also against journalists, because many journalists, were obliged to leave, for example, Mali, where everything started. How they have been attacked, for example, the international media, international journalists. It started with the accreditation. In some countries, mostly in West Africa, if you are a foreign journalist, you come and then you will need an accreditation paper, mostly handled by the Ministry of Communication. And the Ministry of Communication in Mali at that time, they started, for example, to make it extremely expensive the way people had to access to the accreditation. And that was also a hidden way to push out of the country some of those independent journalists who were there, because the amount to pay was extraordinarily high. And also the duration of the accreditation, instead of being 1 or 2 years, it started to be 3 months first, and then 6 months first, and then hardly 1 year. Actually, in Mali, there is no international journalists in Mali. At the beginning, some of them were obliged to go to Niger, but when the coup took place in Niger, they were also obliged, for example, some of them to come here to Dakar. Actually, in Dakar, we have someone who is, going and coming and going back, but who is supposed to cover the Sahel at large. So international correspondent in Niger also, they suffered the same fate after the coup. We have documented physical attacks of journalists, most of whom were French journalists. This is also very good and important to note because of the situation in terms of colonization within the Central Sahel countries. And it started from there when at the first day, during the first day of the coup in Niger, they were the eruption, the birth of a committee to defense, a committee to support the military, and they publicly started to say, yes, the international media needs to go out of the country. These were a kind of blank thing to put those journalists at the hand of civilians. And then we have started, for example, to document how many journalists in Niger have been harassed when they were in the course of their work. Actually, in Niger, it's quite hard to see a journalist working for international media. Those who are doing it are local media, but most of them, they are also trying to hide. So in Mali, no international media correspondent. In Niger, no international media correspondent. In Burkina Faso also, no international media correspondent. Even those who are also correspondent for international media and who are local also, they are extremely cautious. And as of today, I have been trying to manage the case of one of them who was working as a freelancer with foreign international media. And then we had a call, he was explaining me. And generally speaking, the three juntas in the Central Sahel, they censor the media, whenever the country's security situation is discussed and in a kind of unpleasant manner, or when abuses of accusation or abuses are revealed. For example, you might recall the situation of the suspension in one day of 9 media in Burkina Faso. There is also the instrumentalizations of the regulatory bodies. And this is something also we have documented. For example, in Burkina Faso, Captain Ibrahim Traore has directly chosen the president of the High Council of Communication, which is the major regulatory body, and the vice president also is appointed via a presidential decree. If you are familiar with Burkina Faso, it has been a country where the president of this has always been chosen among its peers, among journalists. But since Captain Traore came, he has changed that, and it has been a backward step in the regulatory system, and we also consider that these are also kind of an attack of journalists. That's why they had a kind of boulevard to suspend bluntly the media. The rhythm of suspension of media in Burkina Faso is far higher than in the way in Mali or in Niger or in Chad. We have also seen the national and local. Yes.
You'll have to round up soon because we'll have to go on to the next panelist. But just round up, and then we can go. Thank you.
Okay. I'll round up quickly. Example, in Niger, we have seen the case of Samira Sabu, who has been secretly detained for over a week. We have been the case of Sumana Idrissa Maiga also. And the purpose of summons from our observation, hearings, and detention also is to create a climate of fear and tension within the journalist fraternity. And also something what I wanted probably to finish with after depicting it, this is the way they have been using to discredit journalists, particularly using social media. This is also a very strong trend we have seen and observed. May campaign against journalists. This took place in Burkina Faso. It took place in Niger. It took place in Mali also, and it also took place a bit. It started to take place also a bit in Chad. What I wanted to say to conclude is, for us, the Sahel is now a zone where there is no free and independent information. Local journalists also continue to process information in this way, are in the line of fire of the authorities, and we proud their resilience this is. And as RSF, we also have decided to continue drawing attention to their plight and support them with assistance. We have also mobilized 500 community registration into an appeal with regular seizure of the Special Rapporteur, as we have done with recently in the fate of the 4 journalists missing. We have this declaration on the right to information in the Sahel we will be launching this week. And then our campaign will keep it going with safety training for journalists and strategic litigation using some lawyers. I thank you, and I will be available in the discussions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sadibou. Thank you for that roundup of the situation in the Sahel. And whenever there is more information that you wish to give to the special mechanism, please feel free to come along and give it to us by way of mail or even a WhatsApp call. Thank you.
Thank you.
The next, thank you very much. So the next panelist, Eva, is Mr. Omar Faruk.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Topsy, and for the leadership and for organizing this important day of the commemoration of the International Day Against Impunity. Greetings from Mogadishu, and I'm happy to see fellow colleagues here to talk about the different parts of the continent. And the Commissioner, this is a bold move to convene this webinar on International Day Against Impunity for Crimes Committed Against Journalists, as this is a badly needed initiative in the continent. And we look forward to working with you and helping your mandate to help protect journalists of the continent. The Horn of Africa is tragically one of the most regions in Africa for journalists. The countries within this region have become the epicenter of violence, repression, and persecution of journalists, leading the continent in the shocking statistics of murder, imprisonment, and forced exile of media professionals. In this climate of unchecked impunity, journalists are not only targeted, but are often left without recourse to justice. Somalia, my country, where I'm speaking to you today, stands as the deadliest country for journalists in Africa. This is a sad reality. And Commissioner, just an hour before we have concluded a national commemoration of the International Day Against Impunity, where the government of Somalia, victim journalists carrying bullet wounds on their bodies, and international community representing diplomats attended. Because 62 journalists killed in the line of duty since 2010 in Somalia. Somali journalists who dare to cover the truth face extreme danger, often paying the ultimate price for their courage. They are murdered with impunity, while the killers walk free, emboldened by the lack of accountability. This is an unacceptable reality that underscores the urgent need for effective missions to protect those who bring the truth to light in the face of adversity. Our neighbor Eritrea remains the worst jailer of journalists in Africa, where media professionals are detained incommunicado more than 2 decades, cut off from outside the world and stripped of their basic human rights. Eritrean journalists, unable to access fair legal processes, are subjected to indefinite detention, money without even a formal charge. The silence imposed upon them is a grave violation of press freedom and a stark reminder of the oppressive conditions faced by journalists across the Horn of Africa region. Crisis in Sudan has further deepened the plight of journalists in the region. Sudan has historically been home to the largest number of working journalists in the region. Yet the outbreak of the conflict and political instability has forced those media professionals into unmanageable hardships. Since the onset of the crisis, 6 journalists have already been murdered so far, underscoring the burden that Sudanese journalists face. Meanwhile, over 800 Sudanese journalists have been exiled, fleeing to Egypt, Kenya, Uganda, and Turkey in search of safety. The crisis in Sudan has not only displaced journalists, but has also extinguished the vital voices that are essential for informed society and transition to democracy in that country. The Horn of Africa region is now a critical battleground for press freedom in Africa. The constant targeting of journalists through murder, imprisonment, and forced displacement has created a region of unprecedented hostility towards the media. The impunity crisis is the root cause of this devastating situation, where authorities and violent actors alike feel empowered to commit atrocities without consequences. Impunity for crimes committed against journalists in the Horn of Africa is driven by a complex web of political instability, authoritarianism, and lack of judicial accountability. In many countries in the region, weak legal frameworks, political interferences in the justice system, and the unwillingness of the authorities to investigate and prosecute perpetrators allow violent attacks on journalists to go unpunished. The reality is that journalists are seen as threats, when they expose power abuse, corruption, conflict and crisis, and human rights violations, leading those in power or armed groups to target them with violence, harassment, and imprisonment. This culture of impunity breeds further violence, as perpetrators believe they can act without consequence, knowing that justice for journalists is rarely pursued. As we confront this reality, we call on the governments who are also member states of the African Union in the Horn of Africa, the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, as well as other African Union organs and the wider international community to take immediate and decisive actions. The future of media freedom, the right to freedom of information, and the safety of journalists in the Horn of Africa depend on a firm commitment to end the impunity for crimes against journalists. Only by holding perpetrators accountable can we begin to reverse this tragic trend and safeguard those who risk their lives for pursuing their chosen profession. The gravity of the situation cannot be overstated. Journalists are not just reporting on crises, they are living through them, standing on the front lines of freedom and democracy in one of the Africa's most volatile regions. It is time for action, justice, and meaningful change. We owe it to every journalist who has suffered, been silenced, or forced to flee. And we owe it to the people who rely on their courageous work. To the Horn of Africa region cannot continue as a region where press freedom dies, one journalist at a time. Commissioner, we are very grateful for the opportunity that we're having today, and we will look forward to having a fruitful, and concrete, recommendations so that we can take a meaningful action to address the scourge of impunity that has disgraced the Horn of Africa region and Africa as a continent. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Omar Faruk. And I'd invite you as well, whenever you think that in your area there are certain crimes against journalists or anything happening for freedom of expression and access to information, please reach out to our mechanism. But thank you for having contributed to this webinar today. So I think the next webinar panelist is Mr. Alfred Bulakali from Article 19. Mr. Alfred.
Yes, Commissioner.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good morning from Dakar. And thank you for the brilliant presentation of my colleagues who spoke before me. I'm going to present, I'm going to talk, to have same conversation as Modibo, who focused on the Sahel. I will be mentioning other countries of the West Africa region. And as he noted, the attacks on media and journalists, we categorized them in between the following points. We documented physical attacks. We documented also legal and judiciary harassment, the weaponization of regulatory and administrative mechanisms to media, some direct attacks on media outlets, and of course, the limiting capacity for media and journalists to operate by limiting or withdrawing internet. Going straight to the focus, in terms of physical assaults, we mainly documented cases in Senegal in the context of election and protests. Last month, for instance, a journalist was assaulted while covering a judicial case when an activist, a political activist, was invited by the police. The journalist was assaulted. We noted also during the presidential election that two journalists were assaulted by the police while they were covering protests against the postponement of the election. One of them even brought the case to justice, but it could not progress because after that, an amnesty law was voted, although we know that under African Union legal framework mechanisms, these kind of laws should not cover this kind of crimes and crimes. But however, no, the last time we met the journalist, she said that the case was not moving simply because of this law that was voted and that is being interpreted in a general way to cover all crimes that happened in the context of a political crisis. So we also noted before that, even during the crisis of COVID-19, that some journalists were assaulted because of covering of reporting on the crisis. But none of these cases have been investigated, and the only one that went on the court on the initiative of the journalist is not having progress. We also saw in different countries judiciary and legal harassment against journalists. Taking the case of Gambia, for example, where we are having a journalist prosecuted simply for reporting on the possibility for President Barrow to take over politics after his second term. The president has used that case to take him to the court, his lawyers, for false news. In a normal open space, such a reporting should simply lead to open debates on the governance of the country instead of having the journalists in the court. We also noted that in Nigeria or Senegal here or Togo, judiciary and legal harassment were used against journalists. We noted some cases in Nigeria where the Cybercrime Act is used against journalists to take them to the court. We had also ahead the legislative election that is happening here, 2 cases of journalists called by police for opinion made during shows on TV or other media. We saw that in Guinea also throughout this year, journalists have been convicted simply for their reporting. And in other countries also, we have a case in Togo where the French journalist was first sentenced, then expelled from the country simply because he questioned the intention of the constitutional reform that happened in the country. We also have cases of direct attacks on media by the weaponization of regulation and administrative mechanisms. The key point here is mainly Guinea, where we have a few months ago some media closed, some critical media closed by the government without clear reason on why their licenses are being revoked, or without respect of the procedure that govern that under the regulation law. We had also these cases being used in Togo in the context of election, where some newspapers were suspended for months simply because of reporting on critical information. And throughout the crisis here in Senegal, the pre-electoral crisis, and even during some days before the election, we saw also this being used against a very critical channel here called Wolf TV, where the minister suspended them for reporting on the protests. And before the minister, over the last 2-3 years, the channel have been victims of a lot of cases of suspension by the CNRA, the regulatory body. So this is either using administrative mechanisms or the regulation body. These mechanisms have been regularly used against critical media to suspend them. I don't come back to the case of Sahel Burkina Faso that Modibo mentioned very well. We also had we don't have a lot of evidence, but in areas like Gambia, journalists sometimes report creating form of discrimination to access public funds simply because you are critical, and elsewhere there is no transparency on how it's distributed, and there are a lot of complaints from media outlets that they didn't access, or either they didn't access or they could not have what they think could have been the just allocation simply because of their editorial line. And of course, by shutdowning internet, governments tend to create conditions for media to not operate, both limiting speech in critical periods such as protest or political crisis. We also noted a trend of we are still conducting more investigation, but also we have some reports from countries like Nigeria alleging for surveillance from the government using new technologies, and that also lead to journalist censorship, or surveillance will lead to legal and judiciary harassment at the end. So briefly, these are the cases we documented. We can provide more information on a case by case, name of journalist victims, name of media victims of all these things. I will stop there for the benefit of time and keep open for questions and comments from the participants. Thank you, Commissioner, for the opportunity created to share this through this webinar. Thank you very much. Hello, can you catch me, please?
Yes, Alfred, just 1 second for the commission.
Yeah. Commissioner, please.
Thank you, Alfred. Perhaps she lost her internet. If we can maybe move to Ms. Nompilo, who's going to give a brief on the situation of attacks against journalists in East and Southern Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eva, and also to the ACHPR team and the Special Rapporteur for hosting this webinar in commemoration of the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. Big thank you also to colleagues that are represented here, national and regional partners that have already spoken before me, and of course, all the participants joining us today. My name is Nompilo Simanje, and I am the Africa Advocacy and Partnerships Lead at the International Press Institute, where a part of our mandate is to safeguard the safety of journalists in Africa and demand accountability for crimes against them. And I appreciate this opportunity to engage with all of you with a focus on Southern and East Africa. But perhaps just to highlight also that what we have seen is that there are actually similarities across the sub-regions in terms of the nature and even the sources of the press freedom threats and violations across the region, some of which we have documented is IPI in our Africa Press Freedom Tracker, but also in our monthly fact sheet. And I think in alignment with this year's theme on safety of journalists in crisis and emergencies, I think it's only prudent to sort of highlight the crisis that journalists are facing in Sudan as a result or as a consequence of the ongoing war. As IPI to date, we have documented at least 12 cases of journalists that have been killed, some being targeted, but also some being caught in the crossfire as they're covering the ongoing conflict. And just recently, we recorded 2 cases, one being the killing of Maiwa Abdel Razek, who was killed on June 4, when RSF elements raided his home in Khartoum and killed him together with 3 of his siblings. But also that RSF forces assassinated journalist Makawi Mohammed Ahmed on June 5. More recently, on October 16, we're commemorating 1 year since the killing of female journalist Halima Idris Salima as well. In addition to the cases of killings of journalists there, they've also been forced displacement, something that also my colleague Omar spoke at length about, and with some of the journalists being forced to exile in countries like Kenya, but also destruction of media infrastructure. So as a result of the ongoing war, we have seen an operating environment that has made it not conducive for journalists to continue undertaking their work, but also as a result, resulting in ordinary citizens and the public failing to access information at a time when such information is critical for their physical security as well. So that is one of the key concerns that we continue to have as IPI, but also as different partners that are advocating for free expression across the region. But also one of the other issues that I want to highlight would be the surveillance, threats, and harassment of investigative journalists. I think it's something that we've already spoken at length about in terms of the importance of investigative journalism in promoting democracy, transparency, and accountability. And we have seen such cases also in Eastern Southern Africa, but also even in other parts of the region, for example, West Africa, some cases recorded in Nigeria, for example. And maybe just to give examples from Southern and East Africa, I would want to highlight the case of Vitus Gregory Gondwe from Malawi, who was forced into hiding following threats after exposed corruption involving supply of military equipment. And then also a media outlet in Zimbabwe, Newshawks, reported that they were going to stop covering an alleged corruption scandal in the army following threats, surveillance, and pressure against their journalists. So we see also this trend of self-censorship amongst journalists, especially journalists involved in investigative journalism. And just this week, we were in Joburg at the Africa Investigative Journalism Conference, where such issues continue to be on the agenda. And that's creating a need for us to also ensure that we sustain investigative journalism, even in the face of all these various threats that we are seeing. And of course, one of the recurring crises in the region has been protests in the various countries, some related to elections, but some also related to bad governance. And such environments have also proven to be fertile ground for press freedom threats and violations. And more recently, if we look at East Africa in June 2024, dozens of journalists were assaulted, arrested, and detained. Their equipment was damaged as they were covering anti-finance bill protests in Kenya. One female journalist, Catherine Wanjeri, was even shot 3 times by the police while she was covering that protest. And when she filed a police report, she was also threatened to withdraw that police report on her attack. And more recently in Mozambique, post the elections, the just ended elections, there have also been reports of journalists that have been attacked while covering the protests that ensued from those elections as well. So these are all the crises that journalists are also experiencing and dealing with in parts of Southern and East Africa, and they're reporting where they're attacked, especially also by the police while they're covering protests. And as we think about this, I think it's important to start engaging member states on human rights policing, even with regard to protests, but also even in terms of implementing some legal provisions, including vague laws that we have in some parts of the region. And on that note of laws, I think one of the key aspects that we note also would be the weaponization of cybercrime laws. And this is a recurring issue in the various countries where, while we acknowledge the prevalence of cyber attacks, some that have been perpetrated towards journalists and media outlets, We have also noted the utilization of the vague and overreaching provisions in those cybercrime laws to target journalists and human rights defenders. If we look at Malawi in Southern Africa, journalist Macmillan Mone was arrested in April 2024 using the cybercrime law over a story that he had did, a case which just on the face of it was merely being a cybercrime law being used to target him for his reporting. But also outside these two sub-regions in Nigeria, there have been so many cases of similar arrests using the cybercrime law, despite that it has been reformed even quite recently. So the weaponization of existing laws is well something that we find ourselves being concerned by. And lastly, also, I think also anchoring what has already been said by Omar and other colleagues around coordinated disinformation campaigns. I think even Sadibou also mentioned that. As IPI, we have current investigations that we are doing with partners in the region, where we are investigating cases of coordinated disinformation campaigns against journalists. We will be publishing the reports very soon, but we have seen attacks on journalists in Kenya in the context of the protests, for example, attacks on Standard Media, attacks on Africa Uncensored smear campaigns against journalists in those countries. Our partner Africa Uncensored did a report on coordinated disinformation campaigns against journalists in Ethiopia that have been reporting on the conflict in the Amhara and Tigray regions. We have seen coordinated disinformation campaigns against individual journalists like Stanis Bujakera in the DRC. So these are all various forms that we continue to see, various forms of attacks against the media, which I thought would be important to highlight as we commemorate the International Day to End Impunity for Crimes Against Journalists. And in rounding up, I just want to highlight that having the ACHPR represented here and through the special mechanism of the Special Rapporteur, I just thought it's important to highlight a few recommendations where we would appreciate your support, particularly in engaging states. One, to ensure that all unresolved cases of killings of journalists are effectively investigated and prosecuted, but also that the safety of journalists covering conflict areas is prioritized, including emphasizing that attacks on journalists that are covering conflict constitute war crimes. And then also to highlight, in addition to the issue of human rights policing, the need to facilitate legal reforms, especially for all laws that do not align with our regional and international instruments. In your opening remarks, Commissioner, you already highlighted some of the laws, the principles that we have through the African Commission, which we think should be reflected also in our national laws. And as I mentioned earlier, that we just concluded the African Investigative Journalism Conference. I believe it's also prudent to highlight some of the key requests that were made as part of the statement published by the journalists that convened in Joburg this week. One of the key issues also being that we request the assistance of the international community and media freedom organizations in the region to ensure that all journalists that are unlawfully detained and targeted for their journalistic work are released, and that all charges against them are withdrawn. We have seen so many cases of unlawful arrest and detention of journalists in countries within the region, for example, in Ethiopia. So this is one request also that we are making, but also that in line with our principles that we have laid out in our regional instruments, mechanisms are also put in place to prohibit the unlawful use of surveillance tools by governments and the private sector. And in closing, to ensure also that stronger data protection mechanisms and implementation of existing data protection laws across the African countries are put in place, not only to safeguard free expression and media freedom, but also the protection of journalist communications and sensitive information. I want to end here for now, but of course remain available to engage further on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Nompilo. I had a problem with my connection, but I reconnected as soon as you started. Thank you for your recommendations, very useful. And yes, we'll follow on about the cyber laws and surveillance of journalists, as well as data protection laws that should be more stringent for journalists. Thank you very much, Nompilo. Eva, I don't know whether anyone has any questions or further suggestions.
Yes, Commissioner, there's a request to take the floor from Ms. Nurhan Mustafa. Thank you.
Okay. You see me?
Yes, we can. If it's fine with the Commissioner, that she can proceed.
You see me now?
Yes, you can proceed.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Commissioner, for your organized this important side event and discussion with the civil society. And thank you also for your quick response for any complaint by the civil society. That we appreciate that you open for the civil society safe platform to discuss with you about the freedom of expression and about also the situation of the journal, save the freedom of expression and also the freedom of the information transfer. My name is Nurhan Mustafa. I'm a legal advisor at Libya Crimes Watch. Libya Crimes Watch is a non-profit organization based in UK, and we work on several programs. First one about documenting and monitoring the violation underground, and also we have like program for advocacy, and we have a program to support victims. As we work on documenting and collect the information underground on the violation, especially in freedom of expression and also information, we would like to share with you about Libya. We hear some colleagues covering some country in the region, but Libya, we need more your support to talk about Libya. Libya, we not until now had like a legal framework to have like a space for journalists to work safely, and until now the internal security agencies targeting the journalists, and the targeting any media platform that just sharing information about Libya and about what going there, and they had like similar issues that also not only for legal framework, they had the authorities in Libya provide the cyber crimes law, and the cyber crimes law that cannot have like any space for journalists or any media platform to work free, because if they work through the social media, as you know, the social media is very powering, and anyone like if sharing video or talk about any issues or covering any area in Libya had like issues, they will face a big problem with the cyber crimes law. And also note that in 2023, some reporters collected like 81 violation against the media professional and also for the journalist, and 26% of this statistic that targeting women in the field of the journalist, and because they feeling they have like agenda and foreign agenda, and maybe they also will make like sharing information, wrong information about ongoing situation in Libya, and some of them now not based in Libya, and some of them now near the country near from Libya, like Tunis and also other country. So the targeting by the authorities in Libya, the like internal security agency, that's make not stable for not stable places to media professional or the journalist can work on Libya, and we need your support for calling Libya authorities to
to have like a legal framework to also giving the free places for those journalists. And thank you for all panelists. And we would like to cooperation with you on Libya also. And thank you again.
Thank you very much for bringing to our attention Libya, but it has already come to our attention before, and we are in the process of sending a letter of urgent appeal to Libya. So rest assured that this is going to be done. Thank you. Eva, is there anyone else who wants to take the floor? I'm unfortunately working from my phone.
Thank you, Commissioner. There's no request from the floor currently. A hand had been raised, but it's now been lowered. So if there's no request from the floor, perhaps we can just have the concluding remarks from the panelists. Thank you.
Yes. So who wants to go first? Nompilo? We start with you and we work backwards.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Sorry, I missed you for a moment. If you could kindly repeat.
No, just concluding remarks from you.
Okay. Well, I'd hope that would have perhaps more insights from the floor as well. But I think really in terms of concluding remarks, what I would highlight is that I think I realized the importance of collaboration and coordination across the region, also even stemming from just the recent feedback that we have received, seeing that the nature of press freedom threats and violations that we are seeing are quite similar across the regions. While there might be, different operating contexts, for example, with the security situation in the Sahel, as compared to maybe other countries in Southern Africa, we do see still that the plight of journalists is still the same. And I think there's a need for collaboration across board, which is why we appreciate this opportunity to engage with you and with the special mechanism and the African Commission in general to ensure that we work together to promote or safeguard the safety of journalists. I think one thing I would highlight also as a key issue is that we have developed so many, principles, declarations on principles of free expression and access to information. We have model laws on access to information. I think we have several good guidelines that have been put in place through the African Commission. And I think it will be quite interesting and important to see such principles being taken up at national level and being implemented in national laws and national policies. And I just noticed in the chat quickly that there is our chairperson from the Zimbabwe Media Commission, Commissioner Rubima Goshongwe. And I appreciate that also because I think it's important to have such institutions being represented in these conversations as we think about taking the principles, the regional principles that we've put forward into national legislation, policies and approaches, or even practices. So just the involvement of national human rights institutions in some of these conversations will also go quite a long way in safeguarding the safety of journalists in Africa. So thank you to the Commission and also, to the different stakeholders represented here. I think with that approach of multi-stakeholder collaboration, we'll be able to safeguard the safety of journalists in the region. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nompilo. Mr. Alfred, can you have your concluding remarks?
Thank you, Commissioner. Eva, you were mentioning that we can make it in French and there is translation, right?
There's no translation, but you can just do like a summary in French and summary in English because we have one participant who wanted to intervene in French. Thank you so much.
Okay, I will summarize in French first, then come back to English. Merci beaucoup encore une fois pour l'opportunité. Les différentes interventions ont montré que nous avons beaucoup de similarités à travers toutes les régions. Nous avons presque les mêmes difficultés. Cela dicte les besoins de travailler ensemble, de coordonner nos efforts, de nous compléter, de ne pas faire la même chose au même endroit pour maximiser l'impact de nos ressources très, très limitées. J'ai aussi noté qu'il y a beaucoup de cas que nous documentons, mais il y a peu de support donné aux journalistes qui sont victimes de différents crimes et de différents abus que nous avons notés, d'où il y a besoin de faire beaucoup plus d'efforts en termes de protection et de soutien légal, litigation. Et je pense que c'est important d'accroître les plaidoyers pour la résilience de ces différents médias et journalistes qui sont victimes d'un contexte très difficile. Je sais qu'il y a une initiative de Global Media Fund the Global Fund for Media of Public Service, mais je pense que les plaidoyers portés par exemple par les rapporteurs spéciaux et d'autres pourraient faire en sorte que ces fonds soient ouverts à d'autres médias qui travaillent dans des conditions très difficiles, même s'ils ne sont pas nécessairement des médias des services publics appartenant à l'État. L'autre chose que j'ai noté est que, par exemple, pour notre région, nous n'avons pas été très préparés à un changement brusque du contexte. Et donc, il va falloir nous réinventer dans nos approches, mais également avoir besoin de soutien, de plaidoyer politique. Le rapporteur spécial le fait déjà très bien quand elle est saisie, mais il y a d'autres mécanismes diplomatiques, je pense, qui sont nécessaires puisque le contexte politique dans notre région est très difficile. So I was saying that through the conversation, I noticed that there are a lot of similarities in terms of what media and journalists are facing, in terms of attacks, abuses, legal harassment, judicial harassment, and even physical assaults. One thing that is common is still this impunity, but also the capacity for media and journalists to continue to operate within this context without a lot of support. And I said it's important for us to reinvent maybe our ways of doing by working together, avoiding focusing on same cases, each of us in their own part, but mutualizing, putting together resources and working in complementarity. Also increase our work on protection and litigation, and advocate for a resilience fund for media and journalists who are facing these issues. And I said that maybe the Special Rapporteur and others could be part of this advocacy toward the Global Fund for Public Media Service that is available within this region. Some of the countries, Senegal is eligible, and I think Zimbabwe, but it's not open for all media. And looking at the context, I think that it could have been very helpful for media operating in difficult contexts, even they are not public media, to be eligible to this fund. I added to that saying that we'll need increased political and diplomatic advocacy because our tools as civil society, compared to the situation and the political context, have somehow some limitations, and the political diplomacy can support to have political action to face these issues. So thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur Alfred. Je suis aussi bilingue, mais merci beaucoup pour avoir fait l'interprétation en anglais. Next is Mr. Omar Faruk.
Thank you very much, Commissioner, and thank you for all colleagues for the presentation. It's very clear that impunity is an African problem, and it is the enemy of press freedom in Africa. And for us, we need to address it in a very decisive manner. And I wanted to extend the colleague who spoke on Libya. North Africa is part of Africa, and your problem is our problem. And we believe that the plight of journalists in Libya and other parts in North Africa is something that we all stand up and we extend the solidarity to you all for this struggle. Commissioner, as you know, the African Union has very good instruments in terms of addressing media freedom crisis, the protection of journalists, and the latest was the Peace and Security Council of the African Union to be cited of this matter on the 2nd of September. And they have issued that statement. So for us, one thing that is very important is, number one, like we all say, as Africans and our Pan-African institutions say, an African solution to an African problem. So impunity is an African problem. The crime is committed against the journalists in Africa is an African problem. So we must provide an African solution to it without any further delay. And that is where we are coming to the African Commission on Human and People's Rights, the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, the African Court, to all stand up to make sure that, number one, your mandate is very much strengthened and is effective to deliver justice and protection to journalists in Africa, but also in a way that is very meaningful, that the crisis of impunity needs to be addressed by the mandated African Union bodies. On the question of what can we do, how to address the situation of crisis and conflict, I think it's a matter of us that there is early warning system. Whenever there are things that are going to happen, like the situation in Sudan, we all knew the crisis that was coming. But then there was not much talk about how journalists in that country are going to be victimized. And now we are in a deep crisis in terms of the protection of journalists in Sudan. So that is a very serious thing that we all need to address. Second is these undemocratic laws that are existing in our statute books. They equally need to be addressed and tackled, so that these are the ones that are facilitating the oppression and the victimization of journalists, when not persecuting those who are committing crimes against journalists. So those laws should be effective for the predators of media freedom in our continent. And again, I thank you, Commissioner, for the leadership on this. We look forward to engaging you in different platforms, including the upcoming days of commemorating International Day Against Impunity in Addis Ababa. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Omar Faruk. Then we have now Mr. Sadibou to address us.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. And I would like also to thank you, and thank also all the colleagues. Just also to highlight in my concluding remarks that we will be heading towards elections in many countries this year. And from our observations, elections most of the time are carrying a lot of violence. And then we are also expecting some violations and some attacks against journalists, as we have seen in previous years in countries like Nigeria, in Senegal also. This is something we need to pay a lot of attention as we go. And the issue of disinformation also is something very, very, very rampant. And I'm very happy to see that IPI will be issuing something sooner, a report on this. From our monitoring, we have seen how journalists themselves have been targeted directly using social media. This is something very, very, very rampant in West Africa, and I guess also in other parts, including the Sahel. I was very glad to be part of this webinar. I thank Omar, Alfred, Eva, and Nompilo, and I look forward to seeing you all in the coming days.
So thank you very much, Mr. Sadibou. So I'd like to thank all the panelists, as well as all those who have joined in this webinar. We have taken note of what you've stated, and I encourage you to come forward anytime to the special mechanism with any of the issues in relation to freedom of expression and access to information in Africa. We will help you out. We are open to that. And we also take note of the recommendations that have been made. And as far as possible, we will bring it to the Commission and see how we can address these. So I'd like, on behalf of the Commission, as well as the special mechanism, to thank you all and wish you a very pleasant day. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eva.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Au revoir.
Thank you very much.
Merci.